Hey, welcome to Tech Dive AV Club. Today we're talking about color correction. Now, you might not know it, but this shot was pretty bad off if I bypassed the color correction. And this shot is also in need of some correction here if I bypass the color correction. But the principles we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about recorrecting several different shots, and we're going to do essentially a few different case studies. So in the past episode, we talked about the different tools that were available in Vegas, how they worked, and what you could do with them. And now we're going to actually go through a different case study of different shots, correcting these shots to make them match. So the idea is that when everything's color corrected, it's ready for color grading, which would be the next tutorial. So if I add the effects back that we finished doing at the end of this tutorial here, you can see that they're actually pretty similar. I even have an overlay ready to go. They're not perfect, but they're pretty similar. So we're going to go through how this correction works right now. So I've got all these different shots to look at, but first off, I want to go ahead and drag in some 8K raw red footage that I found for free on this website called Raw Film. Let's find a kind of a shot that's got multiple different colors. Here, let's get something like this with the glare on the lens. There we go. So now we've actually got white, we've got brightnesses and dark values and everything. Let's see what our scopes are saying about this. We're going to go to View, Window, and Video Scopes. And I'm going to hit Control so I can dock that right there. Look at the waveform. Seems like we do have some things above 100, but not necessarily relatively spread out. But you can see most of the data information is kind of right here. Even though we've got some really bright brights and really dark darks, everything should be a little more spread out, which is typical of log footage. And we can correct that ourselves, or we can take a look at, you see it's pretty muted. Nothing's really, it expands out into the color wheels. And that's the whole point of log, is it's kind of condense the color information so you have more room to play with it in the editor. Now a LUT, let's go to the LUTs here, is a great way to start with this. A lot of times you might have the camera knows kind of how it's bent the curves. Because it's logarithmic, it kind of bends at the top or the bottom, sometimes both. It bends the color information. So we're going to unbend it. So in our color correction panel, which I've got docked at the bottom here, I'm going to go to my LUTs, which is this top selection right here, and you can see there's the camera LUT and the look LUT. As we talked about, they have kind of different jobs. There's different layers of LUT. And for the red footage, Vegas actually has some canned LUTs. Now you can get some off Red's website and things like that, but Vegas already has some ready to go. So I know for this one, I need red log film to Rec 709. And again, Rec 709 is just a basic, I think a term for like normal kind of linear broadcast look video. So you can see having a LUT doesn't necessarily mean it's corrected. It just means that it's kind of stretched back to a more linear style. So this is without the LUT and with the LUT. Probably the biggest difference I'm noticing, if I remove it and add it back, is it brings the darkness values back closer to where they should be. So if we look at, let's go to the waveforms again. As we talked about in a previous video, the blacks really are down here to 0. If we remove the LUT, the blacks jump back up, and the brightness values, you can see how they all stretch very differently here with the LUT. We can reduce the strength of it if you'd like. But I think that's actually a very good starting point. So for this kind of shot, the color and everything actually seems pretty good. So as I'm correcting it, there's no indication to me that the white balance seems off, but the levels are still kind of off, even with the LUT. So I'm going to go down to the curves, and I'm going to select this middle curve here, and I'm going to kind of flatten the middle out and see how everything's kind of stretched too far, right? It's like everything's either really bright or it's really dark. So what we're going to do is kind of stretch some of that back to the middle here. Now you can do it too much, right? Like you can see the line I'm creating in the center. By making this dot in the center, I'm just going to show you what I did here. I just double clicked on this line to create a pivot point. And then here I have two pivot points I can do to kind of create a curve. Now, obviously, if you do something extreme, you're going to get extreme problems. You can make it more log with crushing it. But kind of flattening out the middle kind of does a lot for the image here. I don't think you should make it perfectly flat, but let's maybe move this down towards the top here where we can kind of raise up the bottom together. And you can see this is nice because nothing's overblown, even with the bright sky in the background, nothing's overblown. Kind of find, there we go. So I'm moving this dot around because I'm trying to find kind of a good center for where I want to pull the levels up, because it's really the mids that needed some brightness adjustments. The changes we've made have really kind of pulled a lot of the information more into kind of where we can see it. Yeah, especially here at the end, you can really see there's so much more color information on her cap and things like that. Now, you could argue that maybe it's still a little too dark in places, so we could actually pull up. I think we could pull up the darkness a little bit more. There we go. There we go. Now that's the log version. I'm hitting the bypass button here, and then this is it corrected. So for all this one, all we did was add the LUT, which is, it's not something you need to do, it's just an option. But we added the LUT and we added the color curve to correct it, and now we've got something that's got a lot more rich color values. We're not really worried about the white balance on this one. This one's more just about levels, getting a log footage to something more kind of what you want to see. And let's look at a shot that more typically I deal with is something that needs a little bit of color correction. So in a major color correction scenario, we're going to kind of finish with these last shots here because both of these shots have problems. But you can see one of them I intentionally shot very blue. I shot them both kind of dark. I shot them needing some correction here. So we're going to take a look at those. But this is kind of more of a typical situation where you got something kind of almost right. And this one's going to really show you what's happening. So this is a white card that's actually supposed to be white on top, and this is a gray. The brightness values are off and the white balance is off. Let's go to the vector scope here and let's zoom in on some things. So if I go zoom in on picture in picture, let's move this out of the way here. You can see, I'm going to move it to my other monitor. That's where it's supposed to be. That's white balance is supposed to be right in the center. This is supposed to be an equal of all colors, but it is not equal to all colors. It is slightly to the right. Down here, it's a little bit blue, a little bit cyan. Well, there's a very easy way to fix that. We can go to our color wheels here. Now with the color wheels, what we can do is I can hold control when I move these. Because if I don't hold control, it'll move way too fast, right? But you can see when I'm moving it intensely, I can move the whole shot around. So if I move it to yellow, everything turns yellow. If I move it to magenta, everything turns magenta. I'm moving the offset. I'm moving what the center is, essentially, around the vector scope. which is great. I'm going to hit this circle to reset it here in the corner. That's great because that's exactly what I want to do. I want to move it to the middle. So if I hold control and I move it slightly up, control lets me move it real slow. I can now center my white values right there in the middle of the vector scope. Now, if I look at my effects, if I get rid of the picture-in-picture, you can see that this is actually the correct colors for it. So if I bypass it, you can see that it gets actually kind of blue. And if I unbypass it, it looks more normal now. That's great. We can also jump in with the picture-in-picture. If I scoot the picture-in-picture around, make sure it's selected, and go to my son's arm here, you can see the skin tone line's kind of almost right on the skin tone. So as we talked about in the last episode, the skin tone line is this vector right here. It's a guideline, skin of various darknesses and brightnesses, and no matter how dark your skin is, it should always kind of somewhere wiggle along this line. This is a guideline for skin. So this skin right here is right along the line. It's maybe a little red, right, but definitely better. So if we got rid of the color grading, if we bypass the color grading here, there we go. You can see it actually pulls it away. It actually makes the skin more blue. It pulls it away off the skin tone line. So that's why he now looks more healthy, right? So if I remove picture-in-picture again, you can see we're back to the color card. So let's look at the next problem with this shot here, is the brightness values are kind of off. So I can skip all this other stuff here. I can just go down to levels. So again, you could fix this with curves, kind of like we did in the last one. You could fix this with, there's different ways to fix this. But levels is what I'm going to suggest for this kind of issue. Just kind of go to the tool that you know is going to affect just what you need to affect here. So the color is relatively on. Like, we don't really have any color problems anymore. We used to, but we fixed the white balance. Now we don't. So what we can do is we can kind of crush the black. And the better thing to see this with, let's go to the waveform again. You can see this is our white card here, and this is our gray card. We can actually crush the black here a little bit for you can see his shirt kind of in the corners here. That's 0. And you can see kind of the card here. I actually like it best just to have a little bit more of a filmic crush to it, because film tends to treat black. It's very black, like it tends to bias towards black. It's very light sensitive. It's film. So I always like to just crush them just a little bit. It makes it look a little more filmic. But this is a personal choice. If we look at the waveforms, there's nothing really wrong here. Black is hitting right around the 0, and it's all actually visible in the shot. So this is actually correct the way it is. I'm just my own personal touch. I'm just kind of crushing the input a little bit at the start to kind of get the more black tones that I'm looking for. Now, for the brightness values, this is what really needs to go up. So if I go to the other side of this input here, I can pull the brightness values up, and they can actually go up significantly. If I pulled them all the way up to 100, I would be kind of losing some value here. But it can get pretty close to that. I can actually pull, I don't need to overexpose like the white on his shirt or anything, but I can pull up really close to that pretty fairly here. So some little pixels might be overexposed, but those are supposed to be kind of a white anyway. It's really more the perfect white of the lettering in this shot. But if I bypass it here, you can see there's a huge difference. Now, the shot didn't look that bad in the first place, but after some simple corrections, very simple corrections, that would have taken no time at all had I not been sitting here explaining it. Like if I just knew what I was doing and pop, you could get everything going again. So that is how you would do basic color correction. Most everything you do, if your camera shot is near correct, like if you made the white balance of your camera the way it was supposed to be, or the auto white balance is working pretty well, you should be able to kind of find a white and zero in on that and make that your color balance, right? So let's look at another kind of similar situation. So you can see here, something I've actually done is I have corrected both of these shots. These are actually both different if I bypass the color correction. Why did that happen? Well, I was correcting the track effect, right? I wasn't actually correcting the clip in itself. I was adding a track effect. So I'm correcting anything on this track. That's definitely something to keep in mind if you're correcting a lot of footage for your project. This is project-based things, like what works best for you. That's the beauty of this all. If I hit Control Shift and Q, while this is selected, sorry, Control Shift Q, I can create a new track and I can slide this one up, and now you can see it doesn't have the correction. Doesn't. So if I go to the track, if I do this event-based again, you can see that I can now affect this one directly just by being on the event. So I want to go back to this one real quick and go to the track effect I did, and I want to go to the LUTs, and what I want to do is export a LUT. Now this is for correction LUTs. We're not talking about color grading. A lot of times when people talk about LUTs, when you're pulling in LUTs, you're not necessarily doing a correction LUT. But we're going to call this one, I know where that folder is. You would pick your folder, and I'm going to call this Quick Correct. Now, when I go to this one, I can import a LUT, and I'm going to import a camera LUT. I can import this camera LUT, and boom, it will quickly correct, just like this one did. It will add the corrections to this shot right here. Now I don't have to go to every single shot that is in the same situation and do all these corrections over and over again or copy and paste them. I can export the corrections more than one way, right? I could put it on the same track and do it all on the same track, or I could export it to each clip and then do further corrections from there. So now I've got it to where this is corrected on the track, this one's corrected on with a LUT that we can bypass if we'd like, and this one is corrected by nothing. If I move it up here, it will be affected by that color correction, which is not good for it. Makes it way overblown, right? Everything's going to have its own custom solutions. Now this one, as we talked about in the last video, this shot is kind of flat, and but first, before we do kind of any leveling, let's could do a little bit of a white balance here. So we kind of need to decide what is perfect white. Well, if I go into the effects, I'm going to grab picture in picture again, and you can see we've zoomed in on our colors, and now we've actually got a really good color chart here. This one just happens to have a bunch of colors in it, right? But if I move it, you can see this is black and white. Let's kind of look at both these frames here and talk about how in a typical shot there are some things you can do to get some color information without, even if you don't have a color card. Like what I have is the Calibrite Color Checker Passport. If you don't have that, what do you do? Well, first let's go into color grading here. Let me get this out of the way, and I like to kind of see the clip I'm on here. All right, so here what we can do is let's go back to the vector scope here. Now if we look at the vector scope and we go back to picture in picture, we can kind of slide around and see the different colors appear and disappear. If we go to here, it should be mostly skin tone colors and black and white. But it seems Let's scale in a little bit more. Here we should have skin tone, white, and blue. Well, we've got blue, and we've got skin tone, and we've got white, and it's kind of right here. So let's go. Let's get this out of the way now. Let's go to our color wheels. I kind of like this. It's almost exactly right. But as we talked about, we can change kind of the lower values, the middle values, and the brightness values, as well as the offset. I don't really think the offset needs to change, but I think some of the brightness values do. So I'm going to hit Control, and I'm going to tilt these values towards where I want them to be. Now I've kind of got skin tone more where I want it. The brightness values that were kind of going the wrong direction, I've kind of tilted them back to go kind of more on the skin tone line. While the white staying in the center, right? Most of this should be kind of right in the middle of the crosshairs like we talked about. If I go to this button right here, if I go to this drop down here, I can hit magnified, and I can kind of see closer on the scope where everything is. Let's say that you didn't want to eyeball the vector scope here and move this little point around. You want to kind of just pick something white to look at. Well, you can, on the lift, you can specify a black point, but on the gain, you can actually specify a white point. So I'm going to grab this little target right here, and I'm going to select the page, and boom, that actually makes that the white point. So you can see the paper is actually white now. Maybe the paper's not supposed to be a perfect white, so it might not be the best white point to select, but if we wanted this paper to appear perfect white for whatever reason, we've just decided that this is white, and so it adjusted everything around it, and I actually think it did a pretty good job. Like in the last video, we're going to go down to curves, and we're going to look at the waveforms again. I think this one is too bright, and it needs some darkness values. So the reason I'm going to curves is I don't want to affect everything all together. I just want to affect just part of it, and I feel like this was shot in log. Now this isn't like, this has been compressed out, so I don't have a LUT for this one. But this one needs to be, it needs to have some sort of gentler correction. Like I don't feel like it needs a straight drop in the footage. I feel like this needs to kind of drop slowly. So I'm going to add a curve. Woo. Kind of center the curve where I want it. I want that pencil. See, if I get the pencil too dark, everything gets too dark. But I kind of want that pencil to look natural black, right? Like it really look like a washed out black. And that'll be a good sign that I've got everything kind of low enough. So you can see the waveform's more spread out. It's actually, everything's so bright because there's so many reflections and glints. I actually want to pull down some of this top part here. So if I grab the top of the color curve, I can pull down some of this brightness here to where now it's not so overexposed. I find that perfect point where the darks are still dark enough, but the rest of the midtones aren't too affected. And there we go. Let's look at it without and with. I feel like that's a lot better. You can actually see, because we corrected the white, you can actually see more green in the flowers here. That very subtle green appears. The colors pop a little better. With the skin tone is a little richer. Let's go look at our vector scope again. And you can see that it's still kind of washed out though. Even though everything's a lot better, we could still kind of improve the color somewhat. So if I go to the utilities again, one thing I could do is up the saturation. Now you can see when I'm upping the saturation, you can do it so much so, it's like doubling the saturation, right? That's why it's got a 2 there. So much so nothing blows out of the vector scope, but you can see it doesn't really look natural anymore. The greens really pop there, but it really just overshoots the reds. But some parts of it, it's just way too much. So if we go to 0 again, it still doesn't look a little washed out, but you can just punch it up a little bit. And look at that, just a little bit makes a huge difference on kind of how much really color shows through. And you can see it kind of more on as she flips the pages in the book here. A little more, some of the softer colors now, if I bypass it again, that almost looks black and white. Like it's hard to tell that that's red and blue there. But when you put it back on, the red and the blue kind of pop all together. So I think this one's done. Now, again, this is about correcting, not necessarily color grading, right? But I think this is a corrected shot. Even with the overexposed parts here in the corner, everything is visible. The skin tones look correct. She doesn't look sick. The colors look like they ought to. You can see some of the muted colors have come back, like the green there. So I think we've done a good job correcting the shot. Might even back the saturation back down just a hair. Definitely adding saturation helps a lot, but I think I added a little too much. But at this point, it's up to taste. So let's now look at shots that need a bit more correction. So I do use a color chart in this one. So let's walk through everything we know how to do here. I'm going to grab the top of my scrubber here, and I'm going to find the moment where I hold this white card up. If I hit my effects button, I can see that I've already got some cropping and picture-in-picture already done. Mostly because this isn't a crop and picture-in-picture tutorial. These are effects you can just drag and drop onto the thing. I'm going to go ahead and show you that just in case you may not know what it is. If you go over here to your panels and you go to video effects, you can search and go picture in picture. You can drop that on your video right there, and that adds to your video. It really is for making things smaller, but it also works as a very quick and easy way to make things bigger. Whoopsie. I'm going to center that again. All right. I want this as fixed shape. There we go. Now I've only got black, white. This is supposed to be white. This is supposed to be gray, and this is supposed to be black. Now, color-wise, I'm actually not that bad. So we can look here at the vector scopes. We can go to our color grading, and we can go to the color wheels. And we can move the offset maybe a little bit more towards blue. To kind of center this up some, because this is supposed to be kind of more in the center, the very center of the vector scope, because there should be no color representation here, or all the colors should be represented. That might be a better way to say it. So everything should be in the middle of the vector scope. Now, if I bypass it, you can see there's just been a subtle correction, very subtle. I held control while I moved the offset, and that let me do the subtle correction. Now, if I go to utilities here, I can pull up my waveforms. Actually, let's look at a histogram. So with the histogram, when you have a shot that's under or overexposed, a histogram is a good place to look too. Waveforms and histograms are kind of similar in what they're doing, but a histogram is a nice, clean way to look. If I crush the blacks here, you can see I just lose the information until it's all gone. I really can't do that anymore. It's already dark enough. But if I stretch the inputs out, you can see I can bring it to where the information, and now I have the luminance RGB going, so I can see the red, the green, and blue all together, and stretch the information all the way to the tippy top here, and that's as bright as it can go. Now, I'm probably not going to do that, and I'll show you why. Because sometimes when a shot has been so underexposed like this one is, it can cause more extreme problems, like that window right there. The whole thing's now overexposed. So this is backlit. The side of my face is backlit, side lit from this window, and so it's just too bright overall. So it's not like this card is perfect and you have to do everything to this card. But you can see here there's a huge difference if I bypass the color grading versus show you the color grading. Between the brightness and the color correction, man, the shot looks a lot better. Now, better isn't exactly best, right? So let's back down the brightness just a little bit. Because like if I go all the way down, I'm losing a lot of detail there. So here we can kind of eyeball it and just decide how much of that window should I really lose to get kind of the rest of the shot back up. Yes, can you do some cropping effects to do different color grading effects to keep different shots in? Yes, that's beyond the scope of this video, but there is a way to fix this shot perfectly. But I specifically filmed it in front of a window to kind of create these difficult scenarios we'd have to work through. So I'm going to pull it up until I kind of feel comfortable. I'm comfortable with that right there. I feel like that brings back in a lot of my face, and it brings back in a lot of the shirt, and it brings back in a lot of the wall, but it doesn't lose too much of the window. That's not super important information to the shot. It's already kind of overblown anyway, so losing a little bit of the fabric isn't that big of a deal to the shot. So you can see definitely some information loss, but definitely the shot is improved overall. So it's a cost you have to consider. So now, this shot is pretty well corrected, but here's something we can do. Because when we bring everything all together, it might not be exactly what you want. My skin tones are still a little off. I'm actually going to change the temperature of the shot a little bit. I'm going to move it to be a little more blue. Why am I doing that? Because I just know. I just know that'll help because I've done this a lot. But if I go back to the vector scope, you can see if I remove it here, I've got a lot of reds in the shot. But if I just add some blue, I kind of rotate it towards blue, it just kind of fixes some of the issues. Now this would make it worse, right? But adding a little green in there actually fixes some of the issues too. Because there's really no red in this shot, right? Except for my red face. So I can move it to where I have my skin. That's my skin right there, right on the skin tone line. If I move the greens, I actually rotate the skins right to my skin tone line. But then the white values are all screwed up. So this is a fun problem because even though now that the levels are fixed and I can now kind of see things a little better, and I supposedly had fixed the white tones by changing the offset here. If I bypass, if I undo that offset change, It may have technically fixed the white, but my skin's still red regardless. So I'm actually not going to change the offset for this one because I feel like there's more problems. It doesn't need to move all together. I need to move pieces separately. So here's another way you can do it. You don't have to necessarily dance with the color wheels. Um, there are times for that. There are times for the color wheels, but this is a time for the utilities. There's no red in this shot, but if you look on the vector scope, there's like a whole line of red. It goes right directly to red. That's my face. That's supposed to be right here on the skin tone line. If I move the color temperature or the tint, you can see how I can kind of rotate and change, proportionally change this vector scope. But because it seems here, really the blues I could just pull them to blue, right? And the reds are just too red. What if I rotated the hues? Oh my gosh, look at that. Now my skin tone's just right and blue is just right. You can actually rotate everything. You can rotate all the colors. See how it's just spinning like we talked about in the last video, right? So I'm actually going to just rotate this to where everything's right. There we go. That simple. See? Now the blues are right in the blues, skin tone's right on the skin tone line. Maybe, though, you could argue that maybe it's still a little too yellow. I could back it down just a little bit. This is before, after, all the changes. So rotating the hue seems to have fixed everything. It seems to have really just got it right where we want it. Except it's now a little too yellow because the blues might be right where the blue is supposed to be and the reds are kind of right where the red's supposed to be, but there's just a lot more yellow in the shot than there ought to be. Now that's off-white behind me, right? That's where some of the yellow is coming from, but there really shouldn't be so much yellow cast in this shot. Now to get rid of the yellow cast, I can simply it's kind of this yellow green, right? I'm saying yellow, but you can see it right here. This side of the pie, this side of the pie is where it's kind of too balanced here. So I can actually just move away from green with the tint. And there we go. Now you can see I've spread out my skin tone colors. Most of my skin tone's still on the skin tone line, which is why I don't look sick anymore, like I had before. But now everything's really a lot better off. Maybe I'm going to rotate the hues back just a hair. Everything's a lot better off. My skin tone is still mostly fixed, and the redness on my face, well, the reality is I do have some red on my face. It's my lips, and it's my cheeks, and my ears a little bit. My ears especially because they're backlit. The subsurface scattering from the sun on my ears is red. So now it actually makes sense. I'm supposed to have some blue in a shot. I'm supposed to have some red in a shot. But one thing though, it is kind of overblowing just a little bit. So I'm just gonna back down the saturation just a hair. Maybe up the luminance. Yeah, I'm gonna up the luminance so that way we can see more of the shot. This is bringing in more of the brights values, but I'm going to still drop the saturation so that the colors don't overblow, even though I'm kind of brightening everything. So there we go. Now the white actually looks white. The gray actually looks gray. This is a much bigger difference. The shirt actually looks a bit purple. So that fixes it some. I just kind of had over rotated the hue. All right. So the last thing I'm going to do this shot, a lot of people might say it's corrected here. I know personally how my shirt should look and my skin should look and how that wall should look. And I know it's close, right? But it's still just off a little bit. If I go to the vector scope, it looks good from a scope perspective, but I just know that this is all supposed to be just a little bit different. I'm going to go to the RGB parade mostly because we haven't really looked at it much yet. And you can see that this is where it's kind of showing my different color values all separately, so I can see how much they're represented in the shot, where the darks and the brights are. And you can see my color card being held up too. And because I know that color card is being held up, I can kind of see that the blue is a little underrepresented. And I know, just because I know how the shot's supposed to look, I know my shirt's a little purple. So here's how the color wheels work. If something's too purple, or not blue enough, or too blue, or too red, you can see right here how the red's higher and the green's a little higher. You can actually move things away from what you don't want towards what you do want. You can see I'm doing it slowly because I'm hitting control. You can see how I'm kind of balancing out in the RGB parade. I'm kind of balancing out the colors. Now, I wasn't even looking over here, but just by looking at these, by backing down the reds, because I knew I needed to move away from red and towards green and blue, which is kind of towards cyan, right? Because if I need more green, I need more blue, down's the only way to go, and that also naturally backs me away from red. If I get rid of that, you can see, boom, it uncorrects the shot again. My shirt's a little too purple. If I just hold control, move away from red, you can watch how the green, the red, and the blue kind of all line up a little more. And there we go. Now that's how it looks. That's how my hair looks, my shirt should look, though I know that's the color of my wall. This is actually like a perfect color correction here, which is great because this shot was actually pretty, it may have not looked that bad at first, but it was pretty destroyed, right? And so now we know we have a color corrected shot. For our next tutorial, when we color grade, we can deal with it. So when I hold up the Uno cards, you can see that all the colors actually look just right. Now, these Uno cards, not so much, because this one is blue. So in this one right here, when we zoom in on the color card, you can see that this one's blue and it's dark. It's very different than this other one. So if we look at our comparison shot here versus this one, we got a big difference. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to this comparison shot. I'm going to select copy to clipboard, and then I'm going to come over here to this primary shot, make sure it's selected, and I'm going to go to the split screen view, and from the drop down you can either do the effect bypass, or you can do the clipboard, and the clipboard will show you what's on the clipboard, and you can select whether it's the left half or if it's the right half, or all from the clipboard, which isn't as helpful unless you just want to toggle it on and off like this. See? So you can see we're looking at something that we should be able to get a similar picture out of, but it's going to be kind of difficult because I really screwed up that shot on purpose. And when a shot's really bad, it's difficult to get it back to where you want it to go. So we're going to go to the left half. And I'm going to be toggling that on and off as we go. So as we're trying to correct this, I'm going to turn picture-in-picture back on so we can zoom in and see what's going on with our vector scope here. Now, if you look, the vector scope, this is all supposed to be in the center. And if it's white, it's in the middle. And it's all not in the center. So we can go to our color wheels again, and remember, you always move towards the opposite of where you want to go. So if there's too much blue, you want to move towards red, right? We've got like a blue cyan cast here. Obviously, it's right along that line. We move the opposite direction with the offset. and that centers everything up. The thing is that should be kind of round. It's really nothing but black and white. One thing we can do is brighten it up a little bit to help see it a little better. If we go to the utilities, we can go to log exposure. Now for this one, this kind of underexposure here, I'm going to go ahead and show you. We fixed the overexposure. The color's not correct yet, don't worry. We fixed the overexposure previously or the underexposure by moving the levels up. But in this one, I kind of want to move it more holistically. I want to move the log exposure up to kind of bring everything up in a different way. I'm going to do a little bit of both here and get the brightness values kind of where I want them. I feel like that's pretty similar, and brightness values, we'll come back to that in a second. So let's go back to color correction here. All right, so the color correction is obviously really off now when we moved everything. So let's go back to the offset here, reset it. See, it's like it can't center. It's like there's too much color. That is called a color cast. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually use the color wheels, and we're going to, again, with color wheels, you always move towards the opposite color. That's why you can see all the different colors. The opposite color you want to add to it to remove something. We're going to try to get this to move everything back to the center instead of that globby mess. We're going to try to get rid of the color cast. So we're going to start with the lows. Control on the keyboard when I move this, keep it slow, and I'm going to try to move everything a little bit to get it all to center up a little more. We want to make this blob smaller. Some big changes in the highlights here. And actually up the strength of the lows a little bit. Back off the now things are more centered. And that actually does look better. If you look at the original, we're a lot closer than we were. If we bypass the color grading effect, you can see that's a huge, huge difference. Things are still they're oversaturated though, is the problem. So we need to go down to the utilities, and we need to drop the saturation to get things more reined into the legal limits, as some say. So it's because broadcasting has limits for colors that it will display. So now with saturation, we don't need to make it black and white, right? But it's definitely a little too punchy. Back it off just a hair. Let's swap sides here. We're actually getting pretty close. All right, so you can see that we've actually done it. We've actually pretty well got these color corrected. Now you could argue that this one's more perfect or this one's more perfect, but they're pretty well color corrected to just about the same tones. The difference is it is still a little different, so we're going to kind of fix the rest of it here. What happens is that back wall's darker than this wall, back wall. It's also a little bit more green We can do that by pulling away from the greens just a little bit here on the highlights. There we go. So we're just about there. Let's brighten the highlights a little bit. And we can do that by brightening the gain just a little bit. And let's try to make the darkness of my shirt match by going to the lows and kind of dropping the lows just a little bit. So now, really, I think that the drop below is just a bit too much there. Just a hair. So they're pretty close. One's a hair flatter than the other, but you know, we're talking about very small differences now. So now we're to the point where we can actually color grade them. These shots are now corrected and they're ready to go. So we could leave them like this, especially in something like a documentary where just getting true colors is the important thing. This shot has been saved, right? This one's was passable if we take the color grading off of it. It was passable how it was, right? Just dark, right? But we fixed it more, and now it's better. But this one was quite horrid. It was quite horrid. So we bypass it. It was a shot that needed saving. So that one's been saved, and now they're similar. And now we can move on to color grading. So if you subscribe, you can be around for the next color grading tutorial. And I'm excited to see you there. We're going to make these kind of have the same shared look to them, as well as some other things. So stick around.